So I am, Karen, thank you for that intro. I am exceptionally excited to be here, to be back in Colorado. I left Colorado 7 years ago to move to Massachusetts, but my heart is still here in Colorado, and you will be very happy to know my sports allegiances are still in Colorado, which is not an easy task when you live in New England. So I'm still a big Broncos fan. A couple years ago, that was a very good thing to be, and I wore my Super Bowl 50 champion t-shirt proudly around Boston, although I am originally from LA, so right now I'm rooting for the Dodgers, but other than that, still have my allegiances. I also want to start, so we're going to be talking about a variety of challenging behaviors. But before I start off, I have to start off with a confession. And here's my confession. My confession is I am a tweaker. And I know there are some tweakers out there, right? So do you know what a tweaker is? Here's what a tweaker is. A tweaker is someone who is never satisfied with the end product. If you're a baker, you do this. If you're a painter, you do this. If you're a writer, you do this. If you do presentations, you do this. You're a tweaker. You are constantly tweaking. So on the plane this morning, coming in, I was still doing some tweaking. The reason why I need to tell you that up front is there will be a few slides that look different than what you have in your handouts, and I'll try to point that out as we go along, but I tweak. So are there other tweakers here? Come on. I know. All right, good. So I was really worried like no hands would be raised and it'd be just me. So there will be a few, I'll try to point it out, but there will be a few spots along the way here where it doesn't look exactly like what you have. You can write a couple things down there. So talking about rethinking challenging behavior. I want to start with the big picture here of what we're going to talk about. This is from the Center on the Developing Child, a program at Harvard University that does incredible work. If you haven't seen it already, I highly, highly recommend you check out their website. They just released this policy paper a couple days ago. This is an incredibly succinct yet comprehensive policy paper on how do we improve outcomes for kids and families. And what I love about this is they look at these three areas, both of policy and then associated practices, to help in the areas that are most important, especially in early childhood, to help kids be successful throughout their lives and also help the adults that care for them have positive outcomes. We are going to touch on all three of these tonight. So very quickly, supporting responsive relationships. I did hear that. Supporting responsive relationships. What's called the serve and return of adult-child interactions is crucial. And it starts very early on, but we seem to lose it not too soon after kids are born. So what we do with infants, right? How many parents here tonight, right? So all of you probably remember, however long ago it was, the first time that maybe you went out to a party or something after your kid was born. So you're standing at the party, the kids are at home, they're with the sitter or whatever, and you're at the party and you were just rocking. Just moving back and forth because you had spent so much time rocking that kid, right? And I was telling something earlier, my oldest, it wasn't just rocking, it was, I'm going to break the stage, I know. It was stomping. To get her to get to that calm state took a lot of rocking. It's the back and forth interplay between the adult and the child that is crucial for healthy development. We're going to talk about how to facilitate that. Strengthening core life skills. What they talk about in this paper is what we're referring to, or a subset of what we're referring to as social emotional skills. But we know that these social emotional skills are crucial for positive outcomes. And then reducing sources of stress. Everyone, I hope by now, is familiar with the ACEs studies, the effects of toxic stress and trauma on brain development. I feel like I have a cold. Is that coming out weird there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Can we do anything about that?
A little too much reverb.
Yeah, it's kind of, I feel like I've been dubbed in one of those foreign movies where the way my mouth is going is not meeting the words. So reducing sources of stress, because that has a tremendous impact on outcomes. So read the paper. It's an easy read, but it really lays out very nicely the things that we need to do. I think the things that a lot of you are already doing to affect positive outcomes for our youth and families. That's the overlay. Okay, problematic behaviors. What are we talking about? We're talking about the gamut, okay? We have missed the boat in some very important ways when we have dealt with kids from a very early age all the way up to even young adulthood because of our understanding, or really our misunderstanding, of why kids exhibit a variety of problematic behaviors. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. But what behaviors are we talking about? The whole gamut. We're talking about tantrums. We're talking about whining and crying. We're talking about physical aggression, hitting, kicking, that kind of stuff. We're talking about verbal aggression, threatening and cursing, in older kids, obviously, although we have some little ones that sometimes, yeah. Defiance, refusal, kids who shut down, kids who bolt. We have a lot of bolters and runners and that kind of thing. And one that's not on your list there that this was my first tweak of the evening, reflexive negativity. The automatic negative response to a request, to a comment or whatever. And we know in early childhood this is actually par for the course, right? What's a toddler's favorite word? Yeah, reflexively, right? They don't stop and ponder it. Hey, clean up your toys. Could. I don't know. Doesn't happen like that, right? Clean up your toys? No, I don't want to, right? That reflexive negative response. So we're going to look at the gamut of problematic behaviors, and we're going to talk about how to address those. And here are the questions that I'm going to answer for you guys tonight. These 4 questions. First of all, and probably one of the most important questions, because this is where we've missed the boat, why do kids display these problematic behaviors? What we have typically thought about when it comes to these problematic behaviors is at best an oversimplification. So we need to answer this question first. Why do these behaviors occur? Then, very important second question, how do we prevent those behaviors from occurring to begin with? We get this question all the time, right? What do I do when? That's not an unimportant question, but it shouldn't be the first question. First question should be, what do I do before? So the behavior doesn't occur to begin with. We're going to talk about that. And then, of course, comes the when question. Okay, yeah, that's all well and good, but still stuff's going to come up in the moment. How do I address those behaviors in the moment? And then last, but certainly not least, how do we build and strengthen social emotional skills over time so that the behaviors don't reoccur? Okay? Sound like a good task for this evening? Okay. And my second tweak, there's a bonus question. You'll find out what that bonus question is later on. Okay, so in order to get in this frame, I don't want this to be just me talking the entire time. I want you guys thinking about this stuff. So I'm going to pause here for just a few minutes to give you a chance, just kind of with a neighbor, if you came with someone, talk with them. If you didn't, meet someone new. Describe the problem. I know we have parents here, we have teachers, we have other kinds of early childhood caregivers, we have community members and stakeholders. So whatever your role is or wherever you encounter kids with problematic behavior, I just want you to talk for a few minutes to someone next to you about what behaviors you are seeing. Okay? Go for it. Doesn't sound like anyone had trouble thinking of some problematic behaviors? All right, we're on the right track. Now, let's answer question number 1. Why do those behaviors occur? And this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've kind of missed the boat. In order to answer that question, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite jokes. Okay? This is a joke. Guy walks up to another guy leaning against the lamppost, and the guy who's leaning against the lamppost is a little inebriated. And so he's kind of standing there, and the guy walks up and says, "What's going on?" And the guy says, "I lost my keys." The guy says, "Did you lose them here by the lamppost?" He says, No. He says, well, why are you looking here? And the guy says, because that's where the light is. Now, I didn't say it was a particularly funny joke, but it illustrates something. It illustrates why we have missed the boat on behavior. Why have we missed the boat on behavior? Because behavior is what we see. Behavior is where the light is. But actually, the reasons for those behaviors are not what we see. And I know it's a slightly overused analogy, this iceberg analogy, but the behavior is what's above the surface. The behavior is not the problem, although it is certainly problematic. The behavior is the indicator that we have a problem. Okay? So what we have traditionally done over the years is tried to change the behavior directly. And how have we done that? Lots and lots of rewards and punishments and bribes and incentives and all that kind of stuff. And we have found very limited effectiveness. Why? Because the behavior is not the problem. What is the problem? Well, that's our job to figure out. But we know, even though we have to look below the surface, we know what we're looking for. And I'm going to talk about this broadly, and then I'll talk more specifically. We are looking for communication struggles, right? Again, younger kids, not so much. Older kids, certainly. But sometimes younger kids will curse at us, yes? That's a pretty good indication they're having a language problem. Someone, an older kid telling me to F off is struggling to communicate something. Now we know this with little kids, right? Because what do we say to little kids when they are using behavior to communicate something? We give them some advice, yes? Use your words. It's great advice. Unless you don't have the words, right? And I will tell you, again, I'm going to focus mostly on little kids, but I work with 15-year-olds who don't have the words. I work with 20-year-olds who don't have the words. So this communication, these communication skills, if you don't have them, we may see behavior as a result. So looking at communication, again, I'm going to go into more detail about all of these. Next up, emotion regulation. And these are in no particular order. But if you have a child who struggles to regulate their emotions, particularly when something stressful happens, what are we going to see? Behavior, right? So if you have some emotional regulation skill struggles, we're going to see behavior. Sensory processing and regulation. I'm hoping, do we have some OTs here in the crowd? One. Okay, everybody go to her afterwards and talk to her. OTs are crucial to this work. Sensory regulation and processing is one of the foundations upon which everything else is built. And we have lots of kids who struggle to stay regulated or manage all that sensory input. And what happens when they're struggling with that? Behavior. Social thinking, right? When kids struggle to read the social cues accurately and all of that, we are going to see behavior. Executive function skills, I know this is sort of depending on who you read, the umbrella is sometimes very large and sometimes smaller, but we'll talk in more detail about some of those skills. And then thinking in a flexible manner. These are all skill areas that if the child is struggling with these skills, we are not going to see a skill struggle. We are going to see the result of that skill struggle, which is the behavior. So we have really, by focusing on the behavior, we have not intervened always in the way that we need to, in the most effective way, because the behavior is just the indicator of the problem, not the problem itself. We need to shine the light where we don't see it. So this is going to be one of the most important tasks. I was asked earlier by someone was talking with me about tonight, what's like, if people can take away only one thing from tonight, this is it. That the behavior is not the problem, the behavior is the indicator of the problem, and our first task is to shine a light on the problem, these skill struggles. Okay? So what are, in more detail, some common emotional skill struggles? Communication, labeling feelings, right? Just articulating, here's how I'm feeling. This is not easy. And it's certainly not easy to do at a more nuanced level, which I'll talk about a little bit later when we get into some of the interventions. But in order to get help from someone, in order to not punch someone, in order to not scream, you have to be able to translate that into here's how I'm feeling. And we have lots of kids that struggle with this. Expressing your needs, which is slightly different, right? I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling upset, I need a break. I need to move, I've been sitting for too long. Being able to express that. If kids can't do that, we're going to see behavior struggles. Emotion regulation. This is one of the toughest ones. Thinking rationally when frustrated. Again, we're going to talk more about it. But raise your hand if you have not, in the past year, had a moment or two when you were struggling to think clearly because you were anxious about something or mad about something or stressed about something. This happens to all of us. I had a little just minor PTSD earlier. I'll share with you. I'll share the original traumatic event. It's going to sound silly because it's really not real trauma, but I like my cell phone. Do we have any other people here who like their cell phone? Okay. And there was a study, you saw the study that came out recently within the last year or so that talked about the chemicals that get released in your brain when your cell phone pings or whatever are the same chemicals that are released when you're in love. When people say, I love my cell phone, they are talking neurochemically very accurately. So we have come to rely on our cell phones in a very profound way, yes? So I'm at the airport. This was a couple years ago. I'm at the airport. You know, you got to almost completely undress, put everything in the buckets and all that kind of stuff. I'm taking out my phone. I'm taking out everything, put them in the buckets. It goes through. Then you get to the other side where you have to then put everything back, right? And so I got there, got to the other side. While the buckets were coming out, one of the buckets tipped. It was someone else's bucket. It wasn't my bucket, but it tipped into my bucket. So we had to kind of clear that all out. So then I okay, we're covered. I get everything put back, and I do the check everything. Can't find my cell phone. And I right? Like I panicked. I'm like, oh my God. And then I went back to the area and I said, is there a cell phone here somewhere? It fell out. And my thinking was now got clouded because I knew it wasn't my bucket that flipped. But now what I'm thinking is that was my bucket that flipped and my cell phone flipped out. And now it's there somewhere. And oh my God, I'm without my cell phone. And what am I going to do? And you start going there, right? So I go back. They're like, nope, no cell phone here. I'm like, what do I do? I lost my cell phone. He said, well, if you want, you can go through security again and run everything through again. And that kind of was like, whoa, I don't want to do that. So I took a breath and I checked. What I had done, I usually put my cell phone in this pocket. I had put it in this pocket behind my wallet. So when I did my pat down, I didn't register that there was, but I panicked and I couldn't think clearly for a few minutes. Oh my God, that bucket must have been mine that flipped. I was all confused. My little PTSD was, I realized about an hour after I was here, I didn't have my cell phone. And I just, Doug can attest to this, I very calmly, I don't have my cell phone. I need to just go check. Do you mind? And I walked out to the car.
I was panicking.
On the outside, I looked good, but as I got closer to the car, what if it's not there? What if it's not there? What if it's not there? It was there. So we're good. But this can happen to the best of us, right? Where we're frustrated, we're upset. As adults, this can happen to us. So think about a 3 or a 4-year-old, right? 2 3-year-olds don't tolerate frustration very well, and they get upset, and they have trouble thinking rationally. Or managing more longer-term kind of feelings like anxiety, more chronic anxiety or sadness or that kind of thing. This emotion regulation. Sensory processing, again, this is huge. I mean, this should probably be number 1 in our list if I were to order this in some logical fashion. Not only managing the sensory input, but managing your what's called arousal level, right? Your activity level. This is huge. This is at the base of the brain, and if you don't do this well, it's hard to do everything else. right? So we see this in kids all the time who are just completely discombobulated, right? And they cannot. I love the line, I don't remember who I heard it from, but if you say to some of these kids, sit still and pay attention, their response should be, which do you want me to do? Sit still or pay attention, because I'm not going to be able to do both. In fact, I work with some parents who they are constantly, like when we're in my office together, right, and we're having these conversations and we're doing some problem solving and that kind of thing, and the kids are, they're flopping over the seat, or they're playing with Legos, or they're doing all this kind of stuff, and the parents are like, hey, you need to sit and pay attention, Dr. Epstein. I'm like, no. It's fine. It's fine. He actually needs to move a little bit to be able. That's regulating for him. We have a much better awareness of this now than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it's still an area that gets overlooked. This is the first question I ask is, what are their regulation skills, right? And this is developing the 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds that you all are working with. This is one of the crucial skills that they're developing, right? Okay, executive function, that big umbrella of things like working memory, things like forecasting, organizing, processing, shifting gears. And here's my, I don't know what we're up to now, my third tweak. I forgot impulse control, which is kind of important. So I added it. But all these executive skill struggles. In fact, the paper that I referenced earlier from the Center on the Developing Child, they actually just talk about in terms of core skills, executive function, and self-regulation. Now, it encompasses some of these other things we're talking about, but these are crucial skills. Social thinking, reading cues, taking other people's perspectives. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. Back when I was in Cherry Creek, we had a little first grader who was going into the bathroom and peeking under the stalls and looking at the kids and that kind of thing. And when we talked to this kid about like, why is he doing that? Because, you know, other kids don't really want you looking at them when they're doing their private business in there. He was like, really? I'm just curious. Like, just no ability to sort of put himself in that other person's shoes and think about, how would I feel if I were sitting there and people, he probably wouldn't mind actually, but to be able to sort of take the perspective of this other person that maybe this is something they don't want, very important skills that are developing at a very early age. I still remember, I was actually kind of blown away by this. I have 2 daughters, a 15-year-old and an almost 13-year-old, and way back when my oldest daughter, who admittedly has pretty incredible executive function skills, like didn't get it from me or my wife, so I don't know if it's a skip a generation thing or something, but she is really remarkably, she had a, just as a quick aside, she had they were going to some camp with her school, so totally different routine than every other day, right? And so I walked into her room, and on her little whiteboard, she had listed, there were like 25 things that she had to do to prepare for the next day, because it was bringing a lunch in a paper bag rather than in her regular bag, and the water bottle that was different and what you had to do. And it was even color coded, like it was like crazy. But she's really well organized. When she was 3, and she and her younger sister, who was 1 at the time, shared a room, she was going to go into her sister's room to get something, and she stopped and she said, "No, I don't want to wake Zoe." That's like some amazing perspective taking, right? And some amazing, sorry, I'm going back, whoops, no. Hold tight, I went back too far. Stick with me here. Some amazing forecasting to pause and think ahead like that. That's advanced. But little kids can do this. Little kids at a rudimentary way can think about other people's perspectives. But if they don't, we're going to see behavior. And then cognitive flexibility. This is huge, right? These are the kids who tend to think in that all or none manner. Some of you are probably reading about growth mindset, right, versus the fixed mindset, and sort of this growth mindset is the ability to think in more nuanced ways and more specific ways. We have lots of kids who get really stuck. They misperceive information, they get stuck, and they can't shift out of what they're doing to the next thing in that really rigid way. That's going to cause problems, right? So, all of this stuff I'm assuming isn't like new, right? None of the, I'm assuming for most of you what I've talked about, it's like, yeah, all right, these skills make sense. Here's the challenge, and this is the key. when you see a kid misbehaving, we're going to get upset, we're going to get stressed. If he's hurting someone else, we're going to get worried about the safety. All that kind of stuff happens. We are going to lose sight of, wait a minute, that behavior is not the problem, it's the indicator of the problem. This is one of the biggest challenges, especially when we're talking about pretty significant behavior challenges, to hold on to this notion. So the best mantra, if you will, that I have found, I didn't write this, I'm actually not sure who wrote it, I tried to find who wrote it, but like everyone seems to say it nowadays, but it is fantastic, is to say to yourself, my child is not giving me a hard time, my child is having a hard time. This is crucial. Doug and I were talking earlier about some questions that people had wanted me to address ahead of time, and we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. But this was one of the questions. How do you do this? How do you deal with this behavior that is sometimes fairly concerning? This is one of the most important things. That when you see a child misbehaving, to say to yourself, she's not giving me a hard time, she's having a hard time. And then ask the next question, which is, what is she having a hard time with? Because that's going to drive everything else we do, and everything else we talk about tonight is going to be based on your answer to that question. What is she having a hard time with? She's having a hard time staying calm enough to think. All right, well, we got to help her with that. He's having a hard time putting what he's feeling into words. All right, we got to help him with that. So this is the crucial question. And if you are at all stressed or whatever by the behavior, you're not going to be thinking about this. So you take a beat and you say to yourself, she's not giving me a hard time, she's having a hard time. What is she having a hard time with? And then you are going to go off on a very different trajectory with the child, and a much more positive trajectory. It's going to be much more helpful, just reorienting yourself in this way. So I want you to practice this. So the child that you were talking about a few minutes ago, now go back, and you have in your handouts a list of all those skills, all but one, because I added impulse control, so write it down on the list. You have a one-page in your packets that says common social emotional skill struggle, something like that. It's got our South Shore logo on the top. Using that list as a reference, talk to the person you were talking to earlier and describe or identify particular social emotional skill struggles from that list that you can see in that child. That make sense? Go ahead. All right, why? So, first of all, did anyone look at that list and go, all of them? Yeah, especially our kids who have the most significant behavior challenges. It can be all or most of those skills on that list, in part because they're highly intertwined. Highly intertwined. Also, you have lots of kids who have the skills, but they lose access. This is particularly true when they've been triggered and they're struggling with emotion regulation. They lose access to skills that they may typically have, right? So anybody have trouble identifying the skills? Were certain things jumping out at you? Okay. They're not too hard to identify when you know where to look. The hard thing is remembering to look for those skills. That's the hard part. Why is this so important? I love this quote. Thinking of the child as behaving badly is going to dispose us to punish them. But when we reorient and thinking of the child as struggling to handle something difficult, it totally changes our stance and our interaction to helping them with whatever they're struggling with. And this is crucial, because the problems don't reside within the child. These are not kids who are broken that need to be fixed. The problem is an interplay between their skill set and what is being asked of them by the environment. And we adults who are working with them are part of the environment, right? So when we start to think about them differently, not giving me a hard time, having a hard time, we start to interact with them differently in more helpful ways. I have worked with a handful of folks who just that reorienting changes everything. And the child is doing much, much better just because they're thinking about them in that different way, not because it's somehow magical. It changes how they interact with the child, helping them instead of punishing. So this is a crucial, this part of it, again, is like more than half the work, is that reorienting. Thinking of them as struggling to handle something. Okay, now let's go on to question 2. Okay, there's still going to be these problematic behaviors though. Knowing all this stuff doesn't change that. So how do we first, what do we do before? How do we prevent the problematic behaviors from occurring in the first place? This is, again, actually, we can do some pretty remarkable work. And I always like to say this work is simple and it's hard. The basics, the foundations are pretty simple, but it's not always easy to do. First, what we have to do is identify the common antecedents, precipitants, triggers. They are predictable. And you guys know this, right? And in fact, I've had people say, like, it's funny, sometimes when people in my office are like, do you want me to like set them off? I'm like, no. No. Things will happen, but we don't have to purposefully set them off. But they say that because they know. We know what's going to set them off, right? So the first thing to do is identify those things. And these are just, this is not an exhaustive list, but in terms of categories, sensory triggers. Look for those triggers. They're not always obvious. Sometimes they are, and if the kid has good words, they'll tell us the music is too loud or the light's too bright or that kind of thing. But if the kids don't have the words and their sensory triggers, we may not know. So you have to, again, shine the light on that. Peer triggers, huge, right? And we know with certain kids, being paired with other kids is just a recipe for some kind of problematic behavior. Kids with executive function struggles. I know some of you are familiar with the work of Sarah Ward, who does a lot of work in the executive function area. Imperatives or commands are very common triggers for kids with executive function struggle, right? Pick up your toys. No, right? The command itself tends to trigger that negative response. So it's a common trigger for a lot of kids. Changes and transitions. We know a lot of kids really struggle when things get kind of off or don't go according to plans. Just your physical state, right? Tired, hungry. Kids who have been sitting for a long period of time. That's going to be that's usually more kind of like the setting events. How many of you guys get hangry? Who gets hangry? Yeah, right? If I start to get snippy with my kids, the first thing they'll ask me is, when was the last time you ate? And for God's sake, have a sandwich or something, please. So that'll do it. And then there is a highly predictable, adult-related #1 trigger. Like, if you're not sure where to look for this. Anybody know what the #1 adult-related, and this is something the adults do? No. No. And we say it a lot, don't we? We say it a lot. This sets kids off over and over and over again. And people will tell you, I know if he asks for this and I say no, he's going to fall apart, right? Very common. In fact, it's so common. This is one of my favorite cartoons that I've come across recently. Parents will like this. This is parenthood in one picture. Darling, I want you to have everything in this world your heart desires. Can I have an ice cream? Nope. We do it all the time. We as adults do it reflexively. What is one of the most common no's is my favorite. And whenever I'm working with parents on it, I'm like, give me an example. They can't think of anything. Here's the one. 20 minutes before dinner. Can I have a snack? Nope, we're eating in 20 minutes. I don't want you to spoil your appetite. Just reflexively, we do it as adults. And how many of you as adults are thrilled when there's something that you want and you ask for it and whoever is able to control that says no? You guys like when that happens? None of us like when that happens. In fact, I got a prop. Got a prop this morning from the plane. I'm doing my tweaking. They bring me my coffee. This is Southwest, which I love Southwest, and Boston to Denver, great. Okay, so the little cocktail napkin or coffee napkin, I wasn't having a Bloody Mary at 6 this morning, but my coffee napkin, Southwest says, their mantra here, in a world full of no, we are a plane full of yes. Right? They have clued into this issue that nobody likes when there's something they want being told no. It's frustrating. And if you are a young child who doesn't have good frustration tolerance and you are told no, what's going to happen? Some kind of behavior. A very predictable trigger. Very predictable, right? So, just take a minute or two. Think about the child you've been talking about now. We've talked about their behaviors. We've talked about likely skill struggles. What are just a few predictable triggers, antecedents? What sets that particular child off? Okay, spend just a minute or two talking about that. All right, so could you identify, I know that was, I barely gave you any time, but a couple things come to mind as predictable triggers. Okay, so how do we reduce them? Tell you one of my other favorite jokes. Guy walks into a doctor's office. You've all heard this joke. Guy walks into a doctor's office and says, "Doc, it hurts when I do this." And what does the doctor say? Don't do that. Awesome. Don't do that. How do you reduce triggers? By not doing the thing that triggers them. Sounds obvious, right? We don't do that. So if we go back through our categories, if the sensory stimulus is a trigger, find ways to reduce that. Some of these are obvious, but some aren't. And philosophically, we struggle with, well, how are they going to learn to handle that stuff? We're going to come back to that because they're not going to learn by giving them a whole lot more of it. That's not how we learn. So reduce the sensory stimulus. Minimize the contact with those peers. Use declarative statements rather than imperative statements. Make a statement or ask a question rather than the command, right? Hey, where do those toys go? Or, hey, what are we going to do next? What do we need to do first? As opposed to pick up your toys. Those declarative statements tend not to trigger that reflexive negative response, but instead actually prompt some thinking. Oh yeah, where do the toys go? And are at least don't trigger the response, but also can actually sometimes get you sort of to where you're trying to get. We know prep for changes, provide advance notice. One of the things I love about early childhood is that generally speaking, we do a better job of doing some of this systemically, right? What do we do when it's time to clean up? We sing. What do we sing? There's probably a few different medleys going on there, but something along the lines of clean up, everybody everywhere, or something, right? We do things to help with those shifts in gears. Obviously providing movement breaks and opportunities for heavy work to help with some regulation. Have snacks handy. I can't tell you how many people I talk to who say, predictably, I would pick them up from school and they're just a bear, right? And they're having a full-on meltdown and they can't even make it home. And we're like, you think maybe you should have some snacks in the car? And I don't mean to say this in a belittling way. It honestly has not occurred to people. But when you shine the light on, oh, maybe that's, they haven't eaten for several hours and maybe I should have some snacks handy, takes care of that problem. It's a way to reduce that trigger. So again, it's sort of obvious. Oh, here's what I wanted to tell you about. The no thing, this is where most people really struggle philosophically. I have to tell them no, because what do they think the opposite of no is? Yes. So when I say reduce the no, I'm not saying replace it with yes. We've got some other options. I will talk about those options. But if a kid struggles to handle no, they're not going to get, and if it really stresses them out, they're not going to get better at it by giving them a lot more of it. That's not how people learn. So we have to bring it down to a manageable level so that we can slowly build frustration tolerance. But what most of us do is kind of implode them with it. Lots and lots of no's, hoping eventually they'll quote unquote get the message. Look, you just don't get it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because of those skill struggles. So don't do that. Now I'm not saying say yes to everything, but reduce the triggers as much as you can. That's going to put you in a better place to do the rest of this work. So the first thing you want to do, Identify the triggers, reduce them. Then what? Question number 3, how do you address the problematic behaviors in the moment? I want to make this as simple as possible. And again, simple but hard. This isn't easy work because of the skill struggles, but I want to give you a very sort of clear, simple frame for this. When your student or child, whoever it is struggling, they're not doing what you want them to do, just ask. We'll talk more about what that is. What if they've been triggered by the environment? Just help. I'm going to talk about what that is. What if you don't know what to do? You're just really stuck? Just listen. Okay? So what do I mean by just ask? Here's another core principle I want you to remember. Everybody's behavior makes perfect sense from their perspective. From their skill struggle, from their ability to perceive things accurately, everything makes sense from their perspective. And what we usually do is we say no when it would be much more simple in a way, much more effective to just ask what's going on. And let me give you, I heard the story recently, some podcast, had nothing to do with this work, but it was this fabulous story that illustrates this perfectly. A mom who is very into eating healthy and organically and all that kind of stuff, and her kids are used to, young kids used to eating healthy and organically. She comes home one night from a long day at work, and she doesn't have stuff in the fridge for dinner. So, and she's exhausted, she doesn't want to go to the store, so she looks in the freezer, there's a frozen pizza there. It's not something they typically eat, but she doesn't have a dinner to like go back out and go to the store and get stuff and cook, and so she says to her kids, we're going to have frozen pizza tonight. And one of her little kids says, no, I don't want frozen pizza. I don't want frozen pizza. You got to go. You got to buy food. Will you buy food? And this gets her very upset because now she's starting to think, oh my God, she's feeling guilty. Maybe I should go out to the store. And then she's like now resentful. Like, no, look, I'm exhausted. I've been working all day. Can't you just like be grateful and just eat the pizza? And so she like kind of lays into the kid. And he stops, and he's got tears in his eyes, and he says to her, well, could you cook it first? Now, concrete thinker, frozen pizza, we're having frozen pizza. He's thinking, right? Just ask the question, what's going on? I don't want frozen pizza. Why not? Because it's cold and it's hard and it's icy. Oh, that's an easy one. And I will tell you, my experience has been at least a third of the time, if not as much as half the time, when we just ask the question rather than just automatically shutting it down, the solution's easy. Easy. If it's not, if it's a little bit more complicated, then we've got a little bit more work to do. And one of the areas I've been working on a lot the past quite a few years now actually is collaborative problem solving, which if you go to the thinkkids.org website there, you can learn a lot more about it. But just to give you kind of a flavor of this, basically we consider you to have a problem when your needs are at odds with someone else's needs. That's what creates a problem. Your child's needs are at odds with your needs. This was a child who needed to know he was eating something tasty and good, and this was an adult who needed to like have something simple. Those needs were just at odds. You reconcile those. Now that was an easy one. So what you do is you got to figure out, well, what are those needs that are at odds? What's your need? What's my need? And how can we resolve that in some mutually satisfactory way? So I'll give you just a quick example of this. Happened a number of years ago, again, with my younger ones. We were here, this is back where we lived in Colorado. We were driving down Sheridan Boulevard, and my car was filthy, and I wanted to get it washed, and I wanted to go through one of those car washes, right, where you just stay in the car, and it does it all for you, and then you go. And so I said to my girls who were in the back seat, and I think they were like 5 and 3 at the time, or something like that. I said, oh, I want to go through the car wash. And my youngest one was like, no, I don't want to go to the car wash, I don't want to go to the car wash. And I just said, what's going on? It's too noisy, it's too noisy, it's too noisy. I'm like, okay, because you're sitting in there and there's all that stuff going on. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right, it's pretty noisy. My car's filthy. My need was to get the car clean. So how can we get my car clean in a way that's not bothering your ears? And she said, can we listen to some music? Great idea, right? Listen to music, drowns out all that kind of stuff. It's more pleasing to her ears, and the car gets clean. My need gets met, her need gets met. Now, it wasn't exactly a win-win because the music we had to listen to was the Wiggles, which I had been listening to a lot those days, but nevertheless, you know, you got to give a little bit here. But we came up with this sort of what we call this mutually satisfactory solution. It starts by asking the question. And if it doesn't get resolved like frozen pizza, oh, we're going to cook it. Great. If it doesn't get resolved that easily, then just go a little bit further. Okay, that's what you're struggling with. Here's my need. Let's figure something out. Okay. Now, here's what makes this hard when the child has been triggered. You guys know about the fight or flight response. You know about these, what Daniel Goleman years and years ago called an emotional hijacking or an amygdala hijacking, where the rational part of the brain is not functioning, and the emotion part of the brain, which is kind of if your brain were a peach, it'd be right there where the pit is, right in the middle, takes over, and you cannot think rationally. You are, or your children are, literally unreasonable when they have been triggered. I don't mean that as a personality trait. I mean literally unable to reason. And one of the biggest mistakes we make is trying to reason with someone who is unreasonable. It doesn't work. We first have to get them to a reasonable state. Then we can sort it out. So how do we do that? How do we help them calm? And by the way, has anyone been to the Milwaukee airport? Anyone here been to the Milwaukee airport? Here's what I love about that airport. You know that when you go through the security I was talking about earlier and you take everything off and then you have to put everything back together? They have a sign. They call it the recombobulation area. You get discombobulated, taking all that stuff off. Now you got to get recombobulated. I use that word all the time with kids. I don't even think it's a real word. But we have to help kids get recombobulated when they are discombobulated. So how do we do that? This is the tricky part. The easy part is keep your eye on the ball. The task, don't do anything but helping the child calm. That's your only goal when they've been triggered. The tricky part is how to do it because different kids respond to different things. So to give you just a very quick set of ideas that you can try out, there are physical things. Works really well for some kids. Hugs, deep pressure, rocking, shushing. I was telling someone earlier about my daughter when she was 8 was having some anxiety, some trouble sleeping. She would come into our room to get her back to sleep. She was 8 at this point. I would just rub her back and go shh, 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 which resonates all the way back to very, very early infancy, that sort of rhythmic rocking, shushing, whooshing kinds of stuff. That was calming for her. For other kids, it might not work. Some kids don't want to be touched at all when they're upset, right? But for some kids, physical things. For other kids, and I'm talking in more detail in a minute about this, verbal thing, empathy. What's really crucial here, though, is that you articulate the sort of more subtle emotion, not just you're mad. What do you say to someone? When someone is really, really angry and you say you're really, really angry, what are they usually going to say back to you? Yeah. Yeah, I'm angry. You want to get at the underlying emotion. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. And then reassurance. We're going to figure this out. It's going to be okay. Not it is okay, because they're thinking this isn't okay. But it's going to be okay. We're going to figure this out. It's going to be okay. I'm going to help you here. So reassurance and articulation, empathy, validation of what they're struggling with for lots of kids can be calming. And then one of my favorites is distraction. Some people worry about this, especially like turning on the TV, right, to kind of but this shifts people out of that. They're sort of in vapor lock, and you have to kind of shift them out. An activity, doodling, turning on the TV, something that shifts them out, because here's the problem. If a child has been triggered and they are staying in that dysregulated state for a very, very long time, that is stressful. That's not good for their brain. So right now, we just want to get them out of that. And if it's a distraction that helps, go for it. I'm going to talk about the social emotional building, that's skill building that's going to help in the long run, but for the moment, we don't want them staying in that stress for a very long time, because all sorts of things happen in the brain when kids are under tremendous stress. And when they're having lots and lots of those meltdowns throughout the course of their day, that's stressful. So we reduce the triggers And then when they have been triggered, we help them re-regulate and recombobulate as quickly as possible. That's one of the ways we reduce stress. And it helps them slowly start to get better at that. How do we articulate the underlying emotion? I love this. You guys have probably seen these mood dudes. They're all over the place. School psychologists know these pictures very well. But the notion here that anger is a secondary emotion. And what we want to articulate is what's under that. Sometimes it's, I'm worried, but it comes out as agitation. Sometimes it's, I'm disappointed, I'm hurt, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, I'm scared, I'm jealous, all sorts of things. What is validating and what feels, what helps the child feel heard is to get at that. Wow, you are really disappointed. You were really hoping that thing was going to happen and it didn't, and you are so disappointed. I get it. Man, that's disappointing. I get it. There's this work, Susan David, I think is her name, talks about emotional agility. And one of the things she finds is that people who are able to describe their emotions in a more nuanced way tend to be more healthy than people who kind of have that more surface description of their emotions. So we're trying to facilitate that. Okay? And then if you don't know what to do, just listen. A couple quotes to kind of remind us of this. Of course, we've all heard this one. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. Sometimes we talk way too much, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone, but sometimes we just need to listen. And whoever, I don't know who said this quote, but sometimes listening is enough. Sometimes just listening is enough. Will Rogers put it better, though. Never miss a good chance to shut up. Sometimes it is. It's about stepping back and just listening. If you're not sure, just listen. Okay. And I know I'm going through pretty quick because I'm aware of the time here, and we also have a sort of Q&A thing that we're going to do. So question number 4. Okay, we've done all that, but now in the long run, how are we going to build these skills so that that behavior doesn't keep on happening, right? Okay, here's the most important frame I want you to think about, because this is where we really, I think, although in early childhood, I think we do it better than in later years, but even in early childhood, we forget the fact that change is incremental. Daniel Goleman described this beautifully years and years ago, that what happens in the brain when social emotional skills are being built is the same process that happens when motor skills are being built, because it's the same, the brain is set up the same way. Repetition, every time you do it again and again and again, the neuronal connections, the neuronal pathway involved in whatever that skill is, strengthens. The connections between the at the synapses strengthens, and more myelin is built around the axon that improves conductivity with repetition. The way I like people to think about it is like a weightlifting analogy. We got to do reps. You don't go from lifting 5 pounds to 50 pounds. You go from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 with reps. A little bit of stress is good, but we stress kids way too much. We give them way more than they can handle, and they're not going to build skills that way. If I can't lift 100 pounds, I can lift 10, and you tell me to lift 100, I'm going to get injured. And that's the same thing that happens with kids. So really, we are talking about brain reps. That's what we're talking about. Incremental, over and over and over again. Somebody asked the question of how do you do this in the course of the classroom? The answer is a little bit at a time. Actually, smaller, more frequent reps are better than some big skill practice. Over and over and over again. So the way to further this analogy, the way I want you to think about yourself is you're the spotter. You're doing some of the lifting, right? If the kid can't recombobulate by themselves, you're helping them, you're spotting them. Okay? If you want this shirt, go to spreadshirt.com. Luke, I am your spotter. We need to be the spotters for these kids and help them do those reps over and over again. And so what are the reps? What does that look like? Oh, sorry, that's the process that I was just describing. When you have more myelin built around the nerves, the conductivity is much faster. That's what skill growth is. That's what we're trying to. So what are we going for? Here's the frame I want you to use. We tend to do more of the what I want the kid to stop doing. That doesn't go very well. What do you want him to do? Stop hitting. What do you want him to do? Stop tantruming. Doesn't work that way. You've got to think about, what do I want him or her to do instead? And the crucial thing here is go back to those skills, right? So if this is a communication struggle, what do I want him to do instead? Use his words. Don't tell him to use his words. That would be like telling me to lift 100 pounds. Give him the words. You're really disappointed right now. That didn't go the way you wanted it to go. You really want that toy. You're not ready to give up that toy. Give them the words. You do it enough, and eventually they start to do it themselves. You don't have to spot as much. If this is an emotion regulation struggle, calm with them. I had a parent who had to breathe with her child every time they got really anxious until they started being able to do it themselves. That's the spotting we're talking about. Sensory processing and regulation. Facilitate the use of regulatory strategies like proprioceptive input. Executive function. There's a whole world of stuff here, and I put some websites at the end for you guys. I'm not going to go into detail, but there's lots of visual supports and graphic organizers and all sorts of things that help with executive function. Social thinking. Help kind of put into words, hey, I think this person was thinking that. Just throw it out there so they start to ponder some of that stuff. Cognitive flexibility. Test out the hypotheses. The kid says, I'm stupid, I can't do anything. Really, let's think about that for a little bit. I saw you playing soccer the other day. Oh yeah, I'm really good at soccer. Oh, awesome. But you're kind of struggling with football? Yeah. Okay. So you're good at soccer but struggling with football? Yeah. Okay. Just test out this hypothesis. We get a lot of these kids with this rigid all or none thinking who say these very extreme global things. I'm stupid, I can't do anything. Don't say, no, you're not, because then they think you're stupid, because I just said I'm not, and then you're telling me I am. Just ask some questions, facilitate some thinking. Okay, I know sorry, Doug, I know you're probably ready to do the question, so we're almost there. So here's the bonus question. This is all that I've talked about. It sounds all well and good, but it's hard. And what makes it hard, what's the biggest challenge to this work, is the fact that this work is hard. The fact that these behaviors, some of which are pretty extreme, can be stressful to us, can trigger our own fight or flight response, can get us in that state of, oh my God, I don't know what to do, don't know what to do. So here's what I want to leave you with before we go into the question and answer part. In order to do this very important and very difficult work, we need to make sure our cup is full, right? The saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, or the plane analogy that many of you have heard, right? When they give the instructions on the plane, if the masks come down, put your mask on before you put your child's mask on. We need to make sure we as adults are getting what we need, because that gives us the strength and ability to do this very important and challenging work with the kids. So you've got to make sure, and it's not always easy, that your needs are being met, but here's one of the things that I find incredibly important to just keep us in this frame. Two final statements. There are the resources, by the way, they're in your handouts for a bunch of different things that I've talked about today. But these are the last two thoughts I want to leave you with before we go in the Q&A. We have to, in this very challenging work, cut our kids a little more slack and cut ourselves a little bit more slack, because it's tough and it's stressful. So in terms of the kids a little bit more slack, I love this quote. So often children are punished for being human. Children are not allowed often to have grumpy moods, bad days, disrespectful tones, bad attitudes, yet we adults have them all the time. We do. So none of us are perfect, and we must stop holding our children to a higher standard of perfection than we can attain ourselves. I work with some families where literally they're saying, he was really disrespectful and he was yelling at me and that was not okay, or he was yelling at grandma and that was not okay. And then we bring the kid in and we talk about what happened, and it turns out grandma was not so nice to the kid either, right? But the kid's supposed to be the well-behaved one, and we for some reason get a little bit more, cut a little more slack. So just remember that. We're all doing the best we can here, which leads to my last quote, which is probably my favorite quote of all time. I say this very often, from Emerson. Finish each day and be done with it. You have done what you could, Some blunders and absurdities have crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense. We're all doing the best we can. This is tough but important work. Do the best you can, put the day away, and tomorrow's a new day. So with that, we'll turn it over to Doug. I get to sit, yeah? All right.
Yeah. All right, we had questions that came in before, and there's several questions here that you answered great. I mean, the very first one someone wrote out there was, could you give me 3 reminders of what I should remember when I'm not sure what to do, and you're just, you're just asked, just help, just listen, fit that to a T. So I got a couple more,
okay,
if you wouldn't mind.
Yep.
You've spent several years as a classroom teacher in developing curriculum in school districts, one of us writes. How has social-emotional curricula evolved over time from the time you first started to the present?
It's a great question. So those of you that don't know, I was, for about 4 years, I was a classroom teacher teaching social-emotional skills. It was part of our specials rotation. This was one of the best gigs I ever had. The kids would come to, they'd go to art, they'd go to music, they'd go to PE, and then they'd come to my class. And we would teach impulse control. We would teach conflict resolution. We would teach feeling management. One of the ways that I will say it hasn't changed, or at least the way I did it, I think is still the best way to do it, which was very much an experiential learning. Not just talking at kids, but really practicing through game-based stuff and that kind of thing. But I think one of the things that I learned over that time, and I hope we're getting to, although not nearly as much as we should, is the ongoing practice. You can't just teach it once and hope that it's going to last. You have to do ongoing repetition. So one thing we actually did, we were teaching impulse control. We were teaching stop and think. I taught that in my class. We came up with the signal, stop and think. Every teacher in that school, not every time, but as much as possible, when they saw kids being impulsive, they just went. And that was a quick little practice to, oh, right. And we said the think part was ask yourself a question. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? What will happen if I do it? Throughout the day, teachers were doing that practice. That's the crucial part that I think we're still lagging in, is the providing sufficient practice of these skills.
Nice, good. There were 3 that came in. Can you handle 3 at once? Because there was kind of a group.
That's the limit of my working memory. But
What's the most challenging factor in working with schools? Okay. What is your advice to educators who claim we simply don't have time and bandwidth to do this social-emotional stuff? And in your opinion, what's the most compelling and strongest research to date that supports doing just that?
Yeah. So, and those are all linked, right? Because I think the most compelling work, and CASEL is probably one of my favorite websites, the CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. CASEL.org is kind of a clearinghouse for a lot of this research. I think the most compelling research that answers that question, and there's lots of studies that show when you build social emotional skills, you get improvements in academic learning. And I think so often it's changing a little bit, but back when I was first starting off, those things were pitted against each other. Well, we don't have time to do social emotional learning because we have to do the academics. So the most compelling research there is to remind people that when you address and build social emotional skills, you are addressing and improving academics. And so when people say we don't have time for this, one is you're going to get these outcomes that you're putting other time toward. And that what is crucial is that it's not something that is separate. Ideally, what you want to do is embed this. These don't have to be long conversations. This doesn't have to be a tremendous amount of work. A couple minutes with a kid who's sort of struggling just to go over and say, wow, that didn't go the way you wanted. You know what? I know you're having a hard time. Hang tight. I'm going to get a couple kids going on this thing, and then I'm going to come back and just check in with you. That 30-second interaction could be more powerful than, and I apologize for people that do social skills groups, but to go to sort of this once a week social skill group, it's valuable, but if there's not that ongoing work, it's not going to get traction. So to just embed this as a natural part of what you do throughout the day, it's not taking a lot more time. And by the way, it's pay me now or pay me later, right? Because if you don't address the behavior, you're going to end up spending more time dealing with it. So really, in any preventative thing we do, we put the time in. We're going to save the time on the other end of things. I will tell you very quickly my favorite study. It's a small study. I think it was out of Italy, but it found that they looked at over time. The best predictor of 8th grade reading was 3rd grade pro-social behavior. That was the best predictor of 8th grade reading performance. It was a small little study, but one of my favorites because, again, it points to this fact that this isn't, they shouldn't be pitted against each other.
Not either or.
Yeah.
Let's give them a hand. Thank you very much.